The Nishika N8000, a camera that has gained insane popularity over the past few years, and what I can say honestly from my experience is an absolute piece of shit. But this camera produces an effect that no other camera can produce, which is known as a stereograph.
Problems on problems on problems on problems I solve them. I run through the money, the pressure be calling. Left on my blessings, I feel like I'm falling. The birdie is back. Tell me I'm garbage, I'm going through something, that's why I ain't calling.
In this video, I'm going to be going over the process on how I capture and edit photos on this camera, as well as how you can recreate this effect with a digital camera. As I said before, this camera is a 35mm film camera, and it takes 4 pictures out of these 4 lenses. This camera has 3 aperture settings right here on the side of the camera, and this is set to indoor, sunny, and partly cloudy, and then also just sunny. In addition, it also has a low light indicator, so when taking your picture, it will indicate whether it is low light or not. When it comes to operating this camera indoors, a flash is a must. The flash that I have is a simple $60 flash that I got from Amazon, and it is a Neewer brand. When operating this camera, the actual back of the camera is released by this mechanism and flips up. The spool is loaded into the left side, brought across to the take-up spool, and then is wound there. Due to the nature of loading this camera, when you take the first picture, half of the images will be overexposed. And this is just due to the exposure of sunlight when loading the camera. To avoid this, you can actually load the camera in a dark room, but if you don't have access to that, which most of us don't, I recommend taking the first photo of your roll twice. When it comes to shooting on this, I shoot on Portrait 400. I just really like the look of it, but it also can be very expensive. You can shoot on any preference of 35mm film that you like. So what I want to do is actually recreate this effect with a digital camera, because I don't 100% recommend buying this camera unless you're going to shoot on it a lot. So to recreate this effect properly, you would need 4 cameras shooting at the same time and very spaced apart. But the problem with that is cameras are very expensive, and as well as the lenses are bigger, so you won't be able to actually position the cameras well against each other. With that in mind, what I thought I could do is just use a simple slider. I told my talent in this case to pose and hold that pose while I took 4 pictures. I used the slider and set my camera up in a portrait mode position. So once I had my settings dialed in, I used my wireless camera trigger so I wasn't changing the position of the camera. I simply took 1 picture at a time while moving the slider in slight increments. Now I understand this is a very big setup and you don't want to be doing this every time you actually take stereographs. So what you can actually do is use other things as a slider. You could use a cardboard box on a smooth surface, or even use your body at a high shutter and just move slightly while holding the shutter button. I know this is popular in a lot of effects and a lot of tutorials, but I just wanted a smooth and simple way to actually do this as well. Now, using a slider, just make sure that you're on the same horizontal plane and it gives you that clean effect as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to edit these photos and compare them. When it comes to editing your photos, you can use any software of your choice. What I like to use is After Effects because of the user interface and how well you can move the photos as layers. For this tutorial, I'm going to be using After Effects, but the same principles apply to any video editing or photo editing software. So after opening After Effects, I have my photos here. I have 2 stereo images that I'm going to be editing, and then 1 digital image that I recreated for this effect. So I'm going to drag all these photos into my project. After that, I'm going to be creating a new composition. I generally only post these on Instagram, so the actual composition width I'm going with is a portrait format. So this is going to be 864 by 1080. So we're going to rename this composition Stereo 1. And then I'm going to copy that composition twice, Stereo 2 and Stereo 3. So now I'm actually going to look at my images. This one, I can tell that it might not necessarily work, just to do that there's not a lot of depth in the actual image. But when I come to this one, there is a lot of depth. His hand is in the foreground, he is in the midground, and then I have something on the background which will give it that effect. So I'm going to drag both of these photos into my composition, and then I am going to scale them appropriately to the composition. Generally, when I do this, that around 70 to 80% works. I'm going to try with 70 first. I'm going to hide this top layer, and then I am going to play with the bottom layer, as this is the first picture in the sequence. Looking at these photos, if you're looking at the actual exposure, how it looks, is that this would be my roll of film, and then these are the pictures taken in that exposure. So in the first exposure here, I have 1 and 2 pictures, and then the second exposure, I have my 3rd and 4th picture. So when you get your scans done, it's gonna be the lower number is gonna be your first picture, and the higher number is gonna be your second picture. And then what I do is I hide the top one, and then I put this, and I line up, and this picture is going to set my composition and my focal point. So you don't want to exactly put the scale to these borders exactly, as you're going to be moving these pictures a lot, and you'll see that you'll end up with black spaces. So you want to zoom in because you have that resolution and comfortability to do that. So after I have scaled these properly, and it is very important that you have these set at the both scale, I'm going to now zoom in with my scroll wheel. I'm going to duplicate this layer, and then I'm going to hit Control A on my keyboard and bring up the opacity properties of each layer by hitting T. I'm going to decrease the opacity of all of these layers to 50, or just the top two. I'm going to put this one back at 100, because this is my layer I'm going to be basing everything off. And then now I'm going to this middle layer, which is going to be the first layer that I'm going to be animating. So I'm going to move this over and go to the second picture in the actual sequence. So when it comes to actually lining up these photos, you want to find a central focal point. In this case, it is going to be his mouth and teeth. And what you're looking here is when the picture becomes sharp. Sorry, not the picture, your focal point. So right there. This one's a little difficult, but that will work. And then you can see here the perspective shift in his hand and also different parts of his body. So this is my focal point, which is sharp, and then you can see the perspective shift. Now I'm going to go my top layer, which is a total different image. I am going to reveal that, and I'm going to drag this into my composition here. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the teeth. Now I'm going to duplicate this top layer, and I'm going to drag this over for the last exposure and do the same process. And what you can do too is you can hide these middle layers if you're having a tough time, and select that layer again that you're trying to move and line it up individually. Now that I have all my layers lined up properly, I'm gonna hit Control A on my keyboard and bring up the opacity properties by again hitting T, and then increasing the opacity to 100. Now I'm gonna move forward 4 frames and then cut all these layers. I'm gonna do that by hitting Control Shift D and then hitting delete. The reason I use 4 frames is just because it looks the best. I've used 3 and 2, and it depends on the song you animate this to. I just find that 4 frames is a good base number for basically any beat of song when you go to animate it, and then you can speed it up or slow it down accordingly. So now I'm gonna move each layer over, and then what a lot of people do here is they will select all your layers and duplicate them. Bring them up top or bring them forward, and from there, just play it. But this doesn't work. You want it to animate basically from the beginning to the end to back to the beginning. So we're gonna undo that. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna take the middle frames, duplicate these frames, put them to the top, move them over to here, slide this one back, slide this one forward, and just to clean it up, I'll slide this down. So what this does is it goes from frame 1, 2, 3, 4, back to 3, back to 2. And then you want it to go back to 1, but we can actually do that by hitting Control A and duplicating all these layers, and then bring them up top, and now it goes back to the first frame. And then I'm gonna hit all my layers again, duplicate them, and bring them to the top. And then after playing this is the effect we get. So this is a proper stereograph. You can see that he is well in focus, and then that really big motion of his hand in the foreground really sells this effect. And then I went to animate the actual first one using the same method, and as you can see, there's not enough depth in the image to actually sell the effect. In the background, the actual light is moving, but here it's awkward and looks weird. This happens a lot with these stereographs that I do, and it's just comes with, experience of actually shooting with the camera. When you're actually shooting people, tell them to have big expressions with their arms and feet, and this will really sell the effect. Shoot where there's trees, shoot through things, shoot with a lot of buildings, a lot of things moving in the background. This really helps when you're actually taking stereographs. Now, as I said, I wanted to recreate this effect using a digital camera. With that in mind, I'm going to edit these photos and compare them. Comparing the actual two stereographs, you can see that there's some issues with the digital stereograph. As you can see in some of these photos, the model actually moves in certain places, but it is a very good effect to add to your projects. To add to the actual look, you can add film grain, headers, flares, anything you want. That's what I like to add. Now, when it comes to actually comparing the two, I prefer the Nishika N8000 look. That's just something of my preference, but it is a lot of time, effort, and money when you're actually going to do this. What I like to use this for my projects when it comes to my clients is usually brand work. When it's a clothing brand, jewelry, makeup, anything in that realm that really sells the effect and it really gives that eye-catching look. That wraps up the video. I just really wanted to cover the topic of shooting on a Nishika N8000 as it is one of my most requested effects on Instagram. If you want to see more videos like this where I go through my shooting and editing process, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.